When most people think about the world's oldest masterpieces, they imagine the pyramids of Egypt, the marble sculptures of Greece, or the breathtaking paintings of the Renaissance. But humanity's oldest surviving artistic tradition began tens of thousands of years before any civilization existed. Long before cities, kingdoms, or written language, our ancestors were already leaving messages on the walls of deep, silent caves. For more than 40,000 years. And perhaps much earlier, modern humans repeatedly ventured into underground chambers across Europe, Asia, Australia, Africa, and beyond. There, illuminated only by the flicker of firelight, they created remarkable images that have survived the passage of time. The galloping horses of Lascaux, the towering bison of Altamira, the lions of Chauvet, the handprints of El Castillo, and countless other works reveal an artistic tradition unlike anything else in human history. For generations, archaeologists focused almost entirely on the spectacular animal paintings. Those lifelike figures became the center of research, while another category of markings remained largely overlooked. Scattered beside the animals, or sometimes appearing completely alone, were simple symbols: lines, dots, zigzags, grids, circles, branching shapes, and mysterious geometric patterns. For decades, many researchers dismissed them as decoration, random marks, or features with little scientific value. That perspective has changed dramatically. Around 2010, Canadian paleoanthropologist Genevieve von Petzinger began asking a question that surprisingly few scientists had explored in a systematic way. What if these abstract symbols were just as important as the famous paintings themselves? Rather than concentrating on individual caves, she examined hundreds of Ice Age sites spread across France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and other parts of Europe. Over nearly a decade, she carefully documented every recurring geometric mark she encountered, building one of the largest databases of prehistoric cave symbols ever assembled. As the evidence accumulated, an unexpected pattern emerged. Despite enormous distances separating these caves, and despite many of their creators living thousands of years apart, the same small collection of symbols appeared again and again. Instead of hundreds of unique designs, there were only 32 recurring geometric signs, repeatedly used across the European Paleolithic record. The discovery raised an extraordinary possibility. These symbols might not represent isolated artistic choices made by different groups. Instead, they could reflect a much older symbolic tradition shared across generations of early humans. Recent advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning have expanded this investigation even further. Researchers are now comparing prehistoric symbols from Europe with cave and rock art found in Indonesia, Australia, Africa, and the Americas. As these global datasets continue to grow, early analyses suggest that many of these geometric patterns may belong to a symbolic system far older than previously imagined. If these similarities are genuine, the implications are profound. They could indicate that the foundations of symbolic communication existed before modern humans spread across the globe. In other words, the first people leaving Africa may have already carried a shared visual language, or at least a common symbolic tradition, with them as they entered new continents. That possibility forces archaeologists to reconsider one of the biggest questions in human evolution. When did symbolic thinking truly emerge? What mental abilities distinguished our ancestors from earlier human species? And were these simple-looking cave symbols actually recording information rather than serving as decoration? To appreciate why these questions matter, we first need to understand how prehistoric cave art entered the scientific world. In 1979, Spanish amateur archaeologist Marcelino Sanz de Sautuola visited Altamira Cave with his young daughter, Maria Sanz de Sautuola. As she explored one of the chambers, she looked toward the ceiling and spotted something extraordinary: massive painted bison stretching across the rock above her. Their rich red, black, and ochre colors blended perfectly with the cave's natural contours, creating a striking illusion of movement and depth. The artwork was breathtaking. Yet when scientists realized it was approximately 15,000 years old, many simply refused to accept it. According to the prevailing beliefs of the late 19th century, Ice Age humans were thought to be intellectually primitive and incapable of producing sophisticated art. The paintings seemed far too advanced to fit the accepted view of prehistoric life. History, however, would eventually prove those assumptions wrong. Instead of revealing primitive minds, the caves opened a window into a world of creativity, symbolism, and intelligence that had been hidden beneath the earth for thousands of years. The Altamira paintings were dismissed as forgeries, probably created by Sautuola himself to deceive the credulous. Sautuola died in 1888, his reputation destroyed, his discovery rejected. 20 years later, as additional painted caves were discovered across France and Spain, sites whose authenticity could not be questioned, the scientific community was forced to reverse its position. Altamira was real. The paintings were ancient. Our ancestors had been capable of sophisticated artistic expression tens of thousands of years before the earliest civilizations emerged. The discovery transformed our understanding of human cognitive evolution. It also established a pattern of attention that would persist for over a century. The animals dominated. The bison of Altamira. The horses and bulls of Lascaux discovered in 1940 by 4 teenagers chasing their dog into a hole. The lions and rhinoceroses of Chauvet discovered in 1994 and subsequently dated to approximately 36,000 years ago, making it one of the oldest figurative art sites in Europe. The figurative imagery was what captured public imagination. It was what appeared in textbooks, documentaries, and museum exhibitions. It was what researchers wrote papers about, what funding agencies supported, what the field organized itself around studying. The abstract signs were there too. They had always been there. Alongside the horses at Lascaux, there were dots, rows of dots, grids of dots, lines and chevrons, and strange geometric shapes that did not obviously represent anything. Alongside the bison at Altamira, there were claviform signs, shapes that looked vaguely like clubs or keys, repeated across multiple panels. At Chauvet, alongside the spectacular figurative imagery, there were red dots, hand stencils, and geometric patterns that the initial researchers photographed but did not prioritize. The signs were documented. They were not studied. Henri Bouy, the French priest who became the foundational European cave art researcher of the 20th century, mentioned the geometric signs in his surveys. He noted their presence. He did not make them the center of his analysis. For most of the field's history, the abstract signs were treated as marginalia, decorative elements, personal marks, artistic flourishes that accompanied the real art, but did not constitute a separate phenomenon worth systematic investigation. This was the state of the field when Genevieve von Petzinger began her work. Von Petzinger was a graduate student at the University of Victoria in British Columbia, working under paleoanthropologist April Nell. Her initial interest was in the cognitive evolution of symbolic thinking, the question of when and how human ancestors developed the capacity to create and manipulate symbols, to use marks and images, to represent things that were not physically present. The figurative cave art demonstrated symbolic capacity. A painting of a horse is a symbol, a representation of a real animal created through learned technique and shared convention. But von Petzinger was interested in something more specific. She was interested in the abstract signs. The signs, she reasoned, were potentially more significant than the figurative art precisely because they were abstract. A painting of a horse might emerge independently in any culture that has horses, and the desire to depict them. Representational art can be reinvented. The impulse to draw what you see is arguably universal. Abstract signs are different. An abstract sign does not obviously represent anything in the visible world. A zigzag, a spiral, a row of dots. These forms have no inherent meaning. They acquire meaning only through convention, only through shared agreement within a community that this mark means this thing. If the same abstract signs appeared across multiple sites, separated by hundreds of miles and thousands of years, it would suggest one of two things. Either the signs had been independently invented multiple times, which for abstract forms with no obvious reference would be remarkable, or the signs had been transmitted, carried from community to community, generation to generation across time spans that dwarfed recorded history. Either possibility would be significant. Von Pinger decided to find out which was true. The project required systematically cataloging every geometric sign across the European Paleolithic cave art record. This had never been done. Individual sites had been documented. Individual researchers had noted the presence of abstract signs at particular locations. But no one had compiled a comprehensive database tracking which signs appeared where, when, and in what combinations. Von Petzinger spent years building that database. She visited cave sites across France, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. She reviewed the published documentation from sites she could not personally access. She created a taxonomy of geometric forms, categorizing each distinct shape, giving it a standardized name, recording its presence or absence at each site. In her study, the taxonomy eventually included 32 distinct sign types. The 32 figure surprised researchers. The cruciform, a cross shape. The spiral, a curved line rotating around a center point. The dot, a simple circular mark. The line, a single stroke. The chevron, a V-shaped angle. Music. The open angle similar to a chevron but with different proportions. The chord form, a heart shape. The asterisk, a star-like radiating pattern. The pen form, a shape resembling a feather or branch. The clavoform, the club-like shape noted at Altamira, and 22 others, each distinct, each recognizable, each appearing with varying frequency across the European Paleolithic record. The results were striking. The 32 signs were not randomly distributed. They appeared repeatedly across sites separated by hundreds of kilometers and thousands of years. The same signs that appeared in the caves of the Dordogne region of France appeared in the caves of Calabrian, Spain. The same signs that appeared at 35,000-year-old sites appeared at 15,000-year-old sites. The geographic spread was continental. The temporal span was immense, over 20,000 years of consistent sign use, and the total number of distinct sign types was remarkably small. This was the finding that attracted attention. If the geometric signs were random doodles, personal marks, decorative flourishes, meaningless abstractions, there should have been far more than 32 types. Human creativity is essentially unlimited. Random markmaking produces infinite variation. But the Paleolithic artists were not making random marks. They were selecting from a specific limited repertoire, a set of forms that remained stable across vast distances and deep time. This is what symbol systems look like. It is what alphabets look like. It is what the earliest writing systems look like. Von Pinger was careful not to overclaim. She did not argue that the geometric signs constituted a writing system in the full sense, a system capable of encoding and transmitting complex linguistic content. She argued that they constituted a graphic communication system, a set of symbols that carried shared meaning, music, that were transmitted across generations, that represented the earliest evidence of systematic visual communication in human history. The 2016 book, The First Signs, Unlocking the Mysteries of the World's Oldest Symbols, brought the findings to a general audience. The 2015 TEDx talk titled, "Why Are These 32 Symbols Found in Caves All Over Europe?" has been viewed millions of times and remains one of the most accessible introductions to the research. The academic work completed with her 2017 PhD established the scholarly foundation. The field began to pay attention, but the implications extended beyond Europe. The question von Pettinger's work raised, but could not, from European data alone, answer, was whether the 32 signs were a European phenomenon or something older. If the signs were invented in Europe after the arrival of Homo sapiens approximately 45,000 years ago, they would represent a remarkable innovation, but one that could be explained as a local development, a cultural tradition that emerged in the specific conditions of Ice Age Europe. If the signs were older than the European arrival, if they were carried into Europe by the migrating populations that had left Africa, the implications would be far more significant. It would mean that symbolic communication was not a European innovation. It would mean that the cognitive capacity for symbol use was already present before the migration. It would mean that the origins of human symbolic thinking had to be pushed back, possibly by tens of thousands of years. The evidence from outside Europe began accumulating. The Blombos Cave engravings changed the timeline. Blombos Cave is located on the southern coast of South Africa overlooking the Indian Ocean. The site has been excavated since the early 1990s by a team led by archaeologist Christopher Henchelwood. The finds have been extraordinary. Engraved ochre pieces, chunks of iron oxide bearing deliberate geometric incisions, have been recovered from layers dating from approximately 73,000 to 77,000 years ago. This is before the out-of-Africa migration. This is before any human being set foot in Europe. The engravings at Blombos are abstract with cross-hatched patterns, parallel lines, and geometric forms that do not obviously represent anything figurative. They are not identical to the European signs, but they demonstrate that the capacity for creating geometric symbols existed in Africa tens of thousands of years before the European cave art tradition began. The Deep Cliff ostrich eggshell engravings reinforce the finding. Deep Cliff Rock Shelter, also in South Africa, produced fragments of ostrich eggshells bearing engraved geometric designs, patterns that were repeated across multiple fragments, suggesting standardized decoration rather than random marking. The Deep Cliff engravings date to approximately 60,000 years ago, again before the migration. Again, abstract geometric forms. Again, evidence of systematic symbol use, predating anything in Europe. The Trinell shell engravings pushed the timeline even further and into territory that mainstream archaeology has struggled to process. In 2014, researchers published evidence that a freshwater mussel shell from Trinell, Java, a shell that had been sitting in a museum collection since the late 19th century, bore geometric engravings made by a sharp tool. The shell was not made by Homo sapiens. It was made by Homo erectus. The date was approximately 540,000 years ago, 500,000 years before the European cave paintings, hundreds of thousands of years before our species existed. A different species of human ancestor was making geometric marks on shells in Southeast Asia at a time when Homo sapiens had not yet evolved. The implications are staggering. If Homo erectus could make geometric engravings, the capacity for symbolic mark-making is not a recent innovation. It is ancient. It may be a fundamental feature of the human lineage present in multiple species, emerging early in our evolutionary history, perhaps as old as the genus Homo itself. The Indonesian cave art provided another piece of the puzzle. Sulawesi is an island in the Indonesian archipelago located east of Borneo and west of New Guinea. The island contains limestone caves with painted imagery that was largely unknown to international scholarship until the 2010s. In 2014, a team led by Maxim Ober and Adam Broom at Griffith University published uranium-thorium dates for Sulawesi cave art that placed some images at approximately 40,000 years old, contemporary with the oldest European cave art. This was significant. Music. It meant that sophisticated figurative art had emerged simultaneously in two widely separated locations, Europe and Indonesia, music at approximately the same time. Either art was invented independently in both places at the same moment, or the capacity for art was carried by the migrating populations that reached both regions from a common African origin. The 2024 redating made the finding even more dramatic. New analysis published in Nature pushed the dates for some Salawi imagery back to approximately 51,200 years ago, making it the oldest known figurative art on Earth, older than anything in Europe. The hunting scene depicted at the site showing human-like figures with animal features pursuing wild pigs was created when Europe was still populated exclusively by Neanderthals. Homo sapiens had not yet arrived in Europe, but they were already painting in Indonesia. The art was not a European innovation. The art was carried. The machine learning analysis represents the latest phase of research. In recent years, computational researchers have begun applying neural network classification to the global corpus of cave and rock art. Not just the European sites von Petzinger cataloged, but imagery from every continent that produced ancient mark-making. The methodology is straightforward in principle. Train a machine learning system to recognize the geometric signs documented in one region, Apply it to imagery from other regions and see what patterns emerge. The results have been striking. The same geometric forms that von Pettinger identified in European caves appear in rock art traditions worldwide in Australia, in the Americas, in Africa, and in Asia. Not all 32 signs appear everywhere, but a core set of forms, including dots, lines, zigzags, spirals, and hand stencils, recur across cultures that had no contact with each other and across time periods spanning tens of thousands of years. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidental. The pattern is too widespread to be explained by cultural transmission after the migration. The pattern suggests that the geometric sign repertoire, or at least its foundational elements, was carried out of Africa by the migrating populations that would eventually colonize every continent. It suggests that symbol use was already present before the dispersal. It suggests that the cognitive revolution, the emergence of fully modern human symbolic capacity, happened in Africa tens of thousands of years before the first European cave painting was made. The Bennett-Bacon paper added another dimension to the research. In 2023, the Cambridge Archaeological Journal published a paper by Bennett-Bacon, a furniture conservator with no formal archaeology training, in collaboration with established researchers, including Tony Free, the mathematician known for his work on the Anthyther mechanism, and Paul Pettit, a Durham University archaeologist specializing in Paleolithic art. Bacon had noticed that many Paleolithic animal paintings were accompanied by sequences of dots and lines, marks that previous researchers had noted but not systematically analyzed. He proposed that these marks were not decorative. He argued they encoded information, specifically information about animal reproductive cycles. The Y sign, Bacon argued, appeared consistently in association with images of animals during their birthing season. The dot sequences counted and correlated against known reproductive biology appeared to track lunar months between mating, music, and birth. The paper proposed that Ice Age humans had developed a proto-writing system, not a full writing system capable of encoding language, but a notational system capable of recording and transmitting specific practical information. Imagine discovering evidence that ancient humans may have been tracking the seasons 20,000 years before farming even existed. That is exactly what some researchers have proposed. One recent study suggests that certain Paleolithic cave symbols may have functioned as an early calendar, helping hunter-gatherers record seasonal events such as animal migrations, breeding cycles, or environmental changes long before agriculture transformed human society. The idea remains the subject of active debate. Some archaeologists question the statistical methods, the size of the data set, and whether the observed patterns truly represent intentional symbolism rather than coincidence. Healthy skepticism is a normal part of science, yet the research has passed peer review and appeared in a respected scientific journal, demonstrating that the possibility of meaningful prehistoric symbol systems is now being examined far more seriously than it was only a few decades ago. One thing has become increasingly difficult to ignore. The geometric marks scattered throughout Ice Age caves are no longer viewed as meaningless doodles or decorative additions surrounding famous animal paintings. Growing evidence suggests they formed a deliberate visual system, one that remained surprisingly consistent over enormous distances and extraordinary spans of time. What makes this even more remarkable is that similar patterns are found far beyond Europe. Comparable symbols appear in Africa, Asia, Australia, and other regions reached by early modern humans. This raises the possibility that these markings belonged to a symbolic tradition our ancestors carried with them as they spread across the globe. Researchers are still trying to determine exactly what these symbols represented. They may have recorded seasonal knowledge, marked important locations, identified resources, communicated ecological information, or served purposes we have not yet imagined. Whatever their original function, they appear to have been far more than simple artistic decoration. Unlike spoken language, which disappeared without leaving direct evidence, these symbols survived. Ancient conversations vanished into history, But the marks carved into bone, painted onto cave walls, and engraved on pieces of ochre remained protected by time itself. Today, they represent some of the earliest surviving evidence that humans intentionally used visual symbols to preserve and communicate ideas. Calling them writing would probably go too far. They could not express complex sentences in the way later writing systems eventually would, yet they may represent one of the earliest evolutionary steps toward that achievement, a bridge between simple visual expression and the sophisticated written languages that emerged thousands of years later. The collection of recurring symbols identified by researchers in Europe appears to be only one chapter of a much larger story. As new discoveries accumulate across multiple continents and artificial intelligence compares thousands of prehistoric images, the same conclusion continues to gain support. These patterns are neither isolated nor accidental. They reflect an ancient symbolic tradition that may have originated before modern humans dispersed from Africa. If that interpretation is correct, then the roots of symbolic communication stretch back much farther than archaeologists once believed. Before our ancestors crossed into Europe, expanded through Asia, or reached Australia, they may already have possessed a shared ability to create symbols that carried meaning from one person to another. This changes the way we think about early human intelligence. The geometric signs were not crude attempts that eventually evolved into better art. Instead, they may have been the foundation upon which everything else was built. Long before realistic paintings of horses, bison, and lions appeared on cave walls, humans had already discovered something even more powerful: the ability to create an abstract mark that represented an idea. That simple breakthrough transformed our species forever. It allowed knowledge to outlive memory, ideas to travel beyond a single individual, and information to survive across generations. Every alphabet, every map, every mathematical equation, and every written language may ultimately trace its origins back to this extraordinary cognitive leap. The evidence for that ancient breakthrough still surrounds us today. Across 5 continents, hidden inside caves and rock shelters, the same mysterious symbols continue to appear again and again. 32 recurring designs, repeated across thousands of years and separated by immense distances, remain one of archaeology's greatest unsolved puzzles. Perhaps they are humanity's oldest surviving message, a message created long before history was written, patiently waiting for the day we finally learn how to read it.